This is a live recording, and unfortunately we had some audio issues that were out of our control. I hope you still enjoy this live recording of Drafting Compliance.
Hi, welcome to Drafting Compliance. I'm Kayne. He's Tom. And last time we talked about the future of auditing, AI, and potential uses of AI. Today we're talking with my friend, Rob Carson, CEO and founder of Semper Sec, and we're here live in California, San Diego, home of the CCPA, and we're going to be talking about the CCPA today. But before we get to that, Rob, we have some beers. What are we drinking?
We have Buena Vista.
Buena Vista. What does that mean, Rob?
Puerto Carlos, good beer.
This is from Stone Brewery right here in San Diego, so if anybody's local, you'll know this beer. This is a lager, which is not typical of what we drink at the show. We like things with a little more meat.
Well, now, when we say we like, he likes.
So we generally like shade over to the IPA world, but Rob made it very clear that he'd rather not drink an IPA. So I said, I'm sure they have something that you would like. So
it's not Pinecone water.
Yeah,
Pinecone water.
You know, one other thing I think is important for everybody to understand is that the three of us are also vying this year for the Beer Olympics bobsled team. So the three of us, if you guys want autographs on that, just let us know after the show.
I love how I get voluntold for these things. Apparently I'm going to be on a bobsled. That's interesting. Can you be on a bobsled or a kilt?
It's a personal choice. Well, let's crack it.
All right, let's crack this open and see what we're getting ourselves today, folks. And if you've got the Buena Vista,
So this should be pretty light in color.
Yeah, all right, so pour beers here. If nothing else, Tom, you've taught me how to pour beer mostly okay.
Well, I didn't do so good there, but it's
Tom, you got a lot of head on that.
It's lovely. Yeah.
See, I can smell it from here.
So it doesn't smell bad.
That's bad.
I would say
So
this smells like a Bud Light to me.
I can see through this. This is better than Bud Light.
I taste it.
So like Bud Light. It smells like a.
It smells like any Pilsner or Mexican lager smells.
And is Bud Light when you beer?
Bud Light's when you
not go too far.
Yeah. All right, let's taste it. Let's
All right, let's see how this tastes like. It's not. I can tell you right now, my nose it smells like a bright.
It's a lime. I taste it. Not bad.
I just got foam on it first.
This is the kind of beer you want to
It
drink.
tastes like nothing. It's just small.
Well, it's good that it tastes like nothing.
So far.
I'm starting that exercise now.
I'm starting to work on my water. It tastes like good beer.
Cheers.
Well, cheers, all.
Every single time you did that.
Yeah, this honestly reminds me of what I drank in college. It just has some lime in it. It's just not a lot there. So for those of us that are craft beer folks, and I hope there's others besides me, this isn't particularly exciting.
And for those of us who don't want their beer to come with Fedora, this is good beer.
I'll take it. I don't have Fedora, but I'll take it.
I'm going to provide the counterpoint to this, which is its light factors. It does not have. Often Tom on the show will say things like it invites another sip or it coats the tongue. This is why usually after episodes of Drafting Compliance I have a tongue rush and I just go like hard on my tongue to get the flavor away. This thankfully does not have a lingering stench.
This doesn't do any of those things. Is it even gonna? It's 4.7. So we like things that are more like 7 or 7.
So I'm hearing we need to get Tom just a series more, get this man hooked up.
This does not invite me for another sip. It leaves me hollow. I'm being honest.
Hollow inside. It's like my teenagers.
All right.
I'm already halfway through.
All right. I feel like we're here for another reason.
Yeah. So we're going to be taking audience questions at the end of the live taping. So if you've got a question for Tom or for me or for Rob about beer or about ISO or about CCPA or ISO 27701 or about my cap, go ahead and save those for after the taping. But before then, Rob, I want to start with you and kind of ground the audience on the topic. So what is the CCPA? And what should companies, why should companies, especially those of you who aren't in California, why should they care about CCPA?
Great question. So the CCPA, the California Consumer Protection Act, it's like trying to remember what it is, picking up the wrong acronym. Basically, it's there to protect consumer information, right? And there's fines against it. So think of it as GDPR, General Data Privacy Regulations for the EU. It's that for California. To protect consumer protection, what you do with that data, and how it's managed, making sure people are actually aware of what you're doing and letting them know and they have a choice on what happens.
Yeah, I'd just add that the states tend to follow California's lead in this area as well. So anything that's regulatory, stronger on consumer rights in California will generally follow. We're starting to see that already happen in states like Colorado. So one of the reasons you should care is you might want to do business in California, but you also might want to do business in a number of other states that will follow suit very soon.
Massachusetts. I mean, every state's going to have their own privacy thing, but at the end of the day, it's going to boil. A lot of it's going to boil down to the same essential pieces. What do you do?
All right. And so now the next question is about budgets for this. Because I know for really large companies, enforcement isn't going to start, the requirements aren't going to start until 2028. I recently put out a big piece on LinkedIn saying companies should start budgeting about now, actually, knowing the way budgetary cycles work. Does that make sense to you, Rob? Do companies need to start making budgetary allocations and plans for something that's not happening for another 3 years? Or can we just YOLO it and hope it works out in 2028?
Well, it depends if you want a program that actually is effective and efficient, or do you want to just wait till the last minute? It'll only take a minute, but it's going to suck, right? So you can start putting money aside now and start actually implementing those processes as you add employees, as your company grows, things like that. This is just how it is. And it also starts to force everyone to start thinking, why are we collecting this data? What are we doing with it? You have to justify it, and just because is not the answer. You actually have to have an answer for that. So especially with that AI, things like that are coming out, the sooner you can get into it, the sooner you can prevent that stupid.
All right.
I definitely have thoughts on this. Essentially, I always think of compliance as a waypoint to best practice. So if your goal is best practice, which I hope any CISO or compliance professional thinks in terms of best practice, you really shouldn't be starting a privacy program now. You should have been thinking about it. Likely, if you're doing work overseas, you've already contemplated that. And so really you're talking about a delta. So your budget on that delta could be very small, depending on how effective your privacy program already is. And certainly if you're doing best practice on privacy, you have a lot of these controls already, so the delta should be very small.
It's not cheaper to put it in early. It's like when you slowly mature your ongoing things, it's less disruptive to business. Whereas when you put it all in at once, it's painful.
It sounds very disruptive.
It's very disruptive.
Especially for very large businesses, which from a regulatory perspective, they're the ones who, 2028, they're the first tranche of companies. Now, the CCPA also is not passed, so anything we're saying now should not be construed as legal advice. However, we're saying you should start planning now and budgeting for it.
It's not going away, absolutely. And you can deal with any of the states, it's not here, it's coming.
Okay, cool. Well, I want to our first big topic. Apologies to the audience in advance. Sometimes we take on meaty topics, and I want to talk about Article 9 and Article 10 of the CCPA and how that works with ISO 27701 and Rob. You spend a lot of time. So Article 9 specifically says audit requirements, and they were rolled back from earlier drafts, including the removal of zero trust. And it wasn't zero trust the marketing term, it was actually zero trust the architecture. Right? That was removed. What does that tell us? What are the gaps between regulatory ambitions that the privacy regulators want and what businesses need to do to maintain compliance?
That's a great question. So what happens is basically businesses fund elections. So
Say the quiet part out loud.
and what happens is that they're going to try to slow roll things and disrupt their business. They don't know what it is, but they're worried about it. And even in California, which loves regulations, they're the leaders of it. They don't want more if they can help it, right? And so any type of additional thing they're going to try to slow roll or push and delay. So it's, at the end of the day, it tells you that there's always going to be that balance between what the business wants to do and what we need to do as vectors of our data. Now, and then the challenge too is we don't view data, our privacy as a human right. To put it in the EU, it's a human right. Treaty of Rome, it matters. It's a consumer protection interest.
Yeah. Tom, what's your take on the removal of zero trust from those audit requirements? Because
Yeah.
for a while there, it's kind of spooky. Like, we were all being told as CISOs that you need to do zero trust. To be
I've been told that for
CCPA.
10 years anyway.
Only 10 years?
Yeah. So I think what we're seeing is sort of the ambition of the regulatory world hitting the reality of the business world, meaning, I think it's a suitable goal to get to, the zero trust and architectures that are resilient and all that. But it costs money, and businesses' reality is they can't stomach that in necessarily a 2 to 3 year runway. So I think the regulatory ambition got pulled back, but I think we'll see it come back. I mean, I don't think this is a permanent pullback on those regulations. I think we'll see the additional strengthening of these acts as time goes on. Just like NIST has revisions, we'll see revisions to CCPA that brings some of those things back, but the terms might be different.
Do you think CMMC will be fully 100% before CCPA, or which one do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. I certainly wouldn't bet my child's future on either one, right? I mean, anytime the government gets involved, these things take a lot of time, and this is going to be no different. But I definitely think we'll see ratified privacy standards across the nation. We'll see those things uplift over time.
Yeah, and I want to go back to something Rob said earlier, because I think you said that all states are going to have different privacy requirements. I'd say all the states already have different privacy requirements, and in a lot of cases, individual corporations and entities have been adopting privacy practices like ISO 27701. So they've got these in place, but as I understand it, CCPA is not going to recognize that. So how should companies handle the potential duplication of requirements, like audit requirements now, under CCPA when they're already managing a very complex privacy program?
That's a good question. So, for those of you who, I'm an ISO fanboy, I'll be totally honest. So, if they're this is my music, this.
I didn't hear anybody cheer when you said that.
Yeah,
it's just like, wait, there was almost a fanboy.
Well, now I say one cloud.
There's two of you there.
Okay. ISO really cares about you having an actual management system, right? So from the 27001, the information security management system, to the privacy information management system in 27701. And so that framework gives you the ability to operate the privacy program. And then essentially from there, you have that solid core. Because like a lot of these different privacy, different state rules, that a lot of it's kind of like a Mexican food menu. How do you want your rice, beans, and tortilla? Like open face taco, tostada. Rolled up, it's a burrito. Like, it is what it is, right? But the idea is you are able to account for the nuances of what each one has, but you're actually able to run one holistic program without having that challenge. Because if you have a solid foundation, adding whatever Colorado rolls out, or what California rolls out, or Massachusetts, it's not a big deal.
Yeah, I agree. In my world, I think of it as a common control set, right? If you have that deployed, you're really just talking about the delta. If you're using, a program like HyperProof, you can do that crosswalk very efficiently. If you work with a partner like, hey, he's Semper Sec, then you have a partner that can help you understand what that delta might be and help you with your basic practices to meet the delta. But what I find interesting is you're going to see companies approach this in two different ways, right? They're going to come up with maybe a common control set that is ISO. Probably, generally, that's going to be international companies. But you might see a lot of companies in the United States come with a common control framework, goes to something like NIST or CSF or something similar, right? So the deltas will exist, but from different directions. And either way works. I think you're probably in a better position if your common control framework for this is ISO.
Because I would think so too, because like you can actually get a certification on it too, so it gives your program teeth. I think that's one of the things that when you want to go to NIST, and this sounds great, but unless you're going FedRAMP or CMMC, there's no cert, right? So how do you actually have your program teeth force it to get better year over year? You need that. And one thing I'd say to the point of like, you know, HyperProof is a great tool and has that common frame, so there's a huge support there. But the other part is having either in-house or having, you know, outsourced somebody who knows the different things, right? You think about like, you can use an ISO risk assessment for SOC 2, maybe you add a little bit of fraud to it, and now you've covered what SOC 2 needs and you've covered ISO. If you just did what SOC 2 wants, you're probably not going to pass an ISO risk assessment. So knowing which things have more strength, so you have that proper program.
So is that where we're going to see friction then, Tom? Where companies that may have adopted ISO standards, and I'm thinking of, because ultimately CCPA affects a lot of companies, not just those who are based in California. For those companies that adopted an ISO standard, are we going to see friction with California, do you think, where their regulations are not necessarily acknowledging ISO?
I think you see friction in terms of the regulation, right? But I think in practice, people are going to understand pretty quickly that there's applicability between the frameworks. You just have to find where there's not overlap. In those areas, you solve for the delta. But the reality is if you have a strong program already because you're an ISO standard, you're not going to struggle significantly to fill that gap. It's a smaller lift. But if you refuse to understand the differences and you don't understand that you might have different control language to meet CCPA than you did your ISO standard, your initial ISO standard, you're going to run into trouble.
Hold on, I want to double click on that because, as Rob said, you can get an ISO certification. You can have it, you can put it in your trust center, you can reduce friction in pre-sales motions, and sometimes in better risk management for ongoing sustainment activities. But California said, well, that's not valid.
That's right.
Is that going to cause heartburn for those companies that have ISO and they go, wait a second, I have to do something else?
I think, sure, just like, you know, me having to handle 3 different programs causes me heartburn. But it's just a reality of a compliance person, in my opinion. If you're a compliance professional, you kind of understand that is part of the role. You also understand that if you don't have something that helps you centrally manage your compliance platform, then you're going to run into additional heartburn because you're going to have to track down where your control language is, where's your evidence, where, you know, all these things. When you are managing something centrally, it's pretty easy to solve for that delta, in my opinion.
I was going to say, to your point, wouldn't, you know, the good thing is we have 27711. You already have the process for rights meeting, you have the process for subject action reports, you have those processes in place. Now you're just taking California saying, hey, you have 45 days. You have this amount of time to do it. So you're just adding the actual constraint from the regulation as opposed to like implementing a new process. You still have to have this process in place regardless. You're just now adjusting the timeline.
So Rob, on that point, I'm hearing that you can have an ISO program, an ISO 27701, and a CCPA program, even though they overlap substantially. In addition to Tom's point of additional programs, might have a NIST program, might have a FedRAMP, a state ramp, whatever you're doing. Maybe, you know, if you're in the FDA, I'm so sorry for you. Rob, does that feel like something we need to do manually at scale? At any cost efficiency, or is the unit efficiency of trying to maintain CCPA, ISO 27701, presumably ISO 27001, maybe a NIST, like, does that just become prohibitive for companies to do this by hand?
How good are your members? So,
I would sell anymore.
Yeah, they are, but I haven't touched it in a while because we use HyperProof, so it's not, you know, but the thing is, like, using HyperProof, using any, you know, tool that does that piece is going to be very important. Now, the one thing I always caution people is, remember, if you're getting audited against ISO or the CCPA, remember, that's what you're getting audited against. So just like any audit request where they give you a sample list of evidence, the combined framework is a sample of what HyperProof thinks will meet this control. It's still up to you to make sure, is this how we're going to meet this control? And making sure you actually thought through it. You're not getting audited against HyperProof's combined framework, you're getting audited against that standard. But absolutely, because you can reuse, you know, 75, 90% of evidence you're going to be able to reuse. You can do, there's nothing stopping you, even if you're getting audited on the CCPA and 27701, who says you can't run it the same week, right? Like,
If you're running it efficiently.
if you're inefficient, I mean, that's what we do. Like, I mean, you really want to have Audit Fest all year round?
I mean, sort of.
It's a lot of other parties.
I mean, what could be more fun than that?
I mean, BDO.
It's up that way for Christmas. What I really want for Christmas is another audit.
You know? Especially over Christmas.
Oh, yeah.
Better than an audit.
Yeah.
One thing I want to add is sort of the elephant in the room to me is if you're an ISO shop, you might also be a GDPR shop, especially if you're not in the United States. It's probably a program you've contended with. And the delta between what is CCPA and GDPR is much smaller than yet. Now, there's important nuances, right? There's things in GDPR that are worded completely different in CCPA, and you're going to have to contend with that, right? Your opt-in versus your opt-out, your retention period, and all those things. But that's relatively small lift. And so if you're an ISO shop, you've already contended with GDPR, you're in a really good position for things like CCPA.
Now, the other category we had is that you have to have 27701 or 27001 in order to get certified as 277. And not a huge deal. It's easy to do them both at the same time, but understanding that they stack on top of each other, but 27701 doesn't stand alone, as opposed to like 42001 new AI standard.
Yeah, I want to double click that in just a minute, but also to remind our viewers at home that if you're enjoying this conversation on YouTube, ring the bell to subscribe and help me in my quest to find literally any beer that's drinkable. Certainly not this one. And subscribe to this little podcast app of choice to get this as part of your routines. So I want to go back to our questions on privacy audits. We were talking about a little bit earlier, and how any of those privacy audits that we've previously done help companies prepare for CCPA compliance. Because as we've seen, like a lot of organizations are treating privacy audits, I'd say, as a compliance checkbox, rather than a strategic security investment. So what really separates those companies that get genuine value from that privacy program versus those that are just simply going through the motions because GDPR told them they have to do it?
Well, that's a great question. So, and this is universal. When you sit here and go, oh, CCPA says it, like you just, it's like the hackers are going. It doesn't sell. So, you need to have that discussion with the business and making sure it's providing more value. So think about, a proper program. You're going to have onboarding and offboarding. You're talking, HyperConnect always talks about, time to value, making sure that the program gets in place. Think about time to employee value. The sooner you can get an employee up and running, the better. Like that's something that sells. It's like, hey, I can make our employees more productive on day one. I can have them operate way faster than it's having to take 6 months or 3 months to figure out access to whatever it is, right? And same with the privacy piece, like just treating it as how is this going to provide value to the business and changing that narrative. And sometimes, there's going to be parts where honestly you're like, yeah, we have to shut up and tell it. There are parts of that, but if that's where you start, you've already lost. So I think it's more of like, understand why are we collecting this data? If there's a breach, now we have more stuff to deal with, right? If we don't need this data, it's not like wine, it doesn't get better with time, right? It's like, we're like data hoarders, and I think that's where the privacy piece has been a huge value prop. It's like, think about it. Security exists because IT was just doing uptime and availability. Right? Why does privacy exist? Because security is just encrypting stuff.
I want to come back to data breaches in a minute. But first of all, Tom, what's your take on this?
I mean, if you are already contending with best practices of privacy, this is going to be a difficult conversation, in my opinion, from a financial perspective. But I think most companies that have a compliance professional are already talking about privacy law, talking about the differences it means to their business. And certainly they have already heard from legal, I think, in their businesses that the data you keep is a liability, not an asset necessarily, unless there's a great business reason for it. So I think folks are generally prepared for these kinds of conversations, and most businesses, if they're not, they're probably getting lapped or left behind.
Now, I'd say if you're major like healthcare or a big company, you can care about the fines. But if you're a small company, that's not the right narrative. Because, are you really? They're not going to make an example out of you. They're going to make an example out of Facebook. They're going to make an example out of major hospital chain, HCA, something like that. They're not going to go after the small ones. So instead of talking about the fines, talk about the customer trust and what happens if we lose these customers because we've been collecting data we didn't need. Those type of narratives and changing that narrative, because you have to think about what does the business care about, right? And big companies, yeah, you are a target. Smaller companies, maybe you're not the biggest target from a fine standpoint, but you are. Reputation can be a good thing for you, right? You're not target. People aren't going to suddenly, they're not going to keep shopping at Target. Unless you are, right? And you're like, I'm not going to Walmart. Like,
I use the Target breach as a convenient excuse to my wife. I'm like, as a professional, I can't go shopping anymore. That's how I handle it. It was a great opportunity for me personally. Yeah. So I think you're spot on, and I think the reputational risk piece of this, boy, that's a door closer for small companies, and making sure the leadership team and the board understand that is the risk associated with that. That's part of our job, right? That's part of our job as a CISO or as a compliance professional. So if you're not having those conversations, please do so.
I want to go back to the point on data breaches and kind of bring that in, because we've seen companies that were, you mentioned Target, here's pointing down the cat from, right? They were totally PCI compliant, and yet they got shelled, right? Capital One was totally compliant, they got shelled. A whole bunch of companies had a whole bunch of bad times. Facebook was allegedly compliant. They had a $1.3 billion, that's with a B on it, GDPR fine. So my question to both of you is, how do compliance professionals, how do CISOs, how do we get executives to recognize if their privacy program is actually making them more secure and engendering customer trust and maintaining it, versus this is a cost center compliance thing we're doing, not because we want to, but because insert entity here is forcing you to. How do we have that conversation with the board and with the other senior executives?
I think the first part is asking what they care about. So next time you do a risk assessment, ask the different business units, how are you bonused? What are your KPIs? That's the first part. We need to know how they make money, what they care about. And then you start to shift that narrative to, we have a problem here, this is how it's going to affect your bonus. This is how it's going to affect your job security. Like, talking about it is something that they care about and how the P&L works versus the hackers can. Because we all thought GDPR was going to come. So Facebook got a big fund, but there were much smaller companies where, oh my God, we got to do this, and and did anything happen? Let's be honest, it didn't. Right?
Do I feel better about Facebook right now because they got fined?
What are you going to use, MySpace?
Well, yeah, I'm huge on MySpace. You're talking my language.
I got friends there, so
No, I think you're spot on. I think one of the things, some of the news has been helpful to us, security professionals, in terms of making executives and the board more culpable in the final risk equation, right? And so if you're not educating your executive team and your boards, that the courts are increasingly deciding against you if you're not making informed decisions and you're not asking for data and you're not making appropriate actions based on that data. So they've done us a favor in that sense, right? And again, it just underlines the idea that you should be implementing controls from a best practice perspective and happen to be compliance along the way.
Yeah, well, the other part is you gotta have a good story to tell if you get breached, right? Were you acting in good faith? Will your insurance policy pay out because you mitigated the loss and you didn't have veteran statuses or things that were very sensitive information that weren't relevant to what you do?
So Rob, I want to go back to something I want to pull us the Rambo. Yeah, so you said we should be talking to the business units about what they're getting paid on, their bonuses, what they look like to be called KPIs, maybe OKRs, depending on the person who came up with an acronym.
It's got to be a person somewhere.
Yeah, I'm sure. So what do we do with that information? Like, let's say that I have a KPI of, you mentioned HR, let's say it's employee happiness, right? It's a good KPI. People want to be happy. We all like to be happy. how could we help them understand how a privacy program could either enable that or prevent negative outcomes?
Great.
Let's get into
I
it.
tee that one up. That's perfect. So, if a lot of times, when I'm talking to companies, I'm like, hey, HR is important, but you can't buy them new jobs, right? Like, we got to make sure we protect what brings in the revenue. However, for HR, hey, if all of the employee data gets breached and people start messing with people's credit scores, their ability to buy a car, buy a house, their likelihood, I can tell you their happiness score is going to go down a bit. Like, LifeLock is not going to make them feel better. I mean, I've got a few letters from the Office of Personal Management, and I feel like my data's been breached 3 or 4 times, so if I ever get a clearance again, I'll just call China for a backup. Like, my happiness went down. But that's a great example. Like, that's exactly, they're not going to be happy, so now it's going to affect their work product because they're now distracted with someone that's stolen their data and impersonating them. They can't buy the house they were trying to close on. Like, they're going to be upset. So, like, that's a discussion that, like, you can materially impact an employee's happiness because, like, if you affect their family, you got to the core of what they care about.
Yeah, let me argue that one. Right. So in Dittman versus UPMC, and yes, I am that boring guy who can quote legal stuff. So the Pennsylvania Supreme Court found the UPMC did not have a right. They did not have a requirement. They didn't need to protect employee data at all. Now that's Pennsylvania state law. That depends based on location. How do you deal with people who say, well, we're not legally required to do this?
You're absolutely right. You're also not legally required to have company happy hours. You're not legally required to give them swag. You're not legally required to, like, care about them. But do you like having employees?
Good employees. Right? Some people say, oh, yes.
The ones that are talented are going to, like, they can go other places. They have options. Like, the ones who suck, yeah, that's still be there, so you stuck with the sucking employees.
Yeah, I would just say there's a cost to doing business, and there's a burden for having employees, and I think most businesses understand that. I also think that lots of companies don't get it right, and so that it's incumbent upon us, right, as professionals in this space, to make sure our companies get it right and to educate our leadership on what it means to get it right, and the reasons why you need to get it right, and the potential risks and or penalties associated with not getting it right. Doesn't mean we're ever going to be perfect, but this is a continuous improvement game.
So there's the thing you said about educating the executive team. So when I was on the other side, I hated this. But if you find that what you're saying isn't being listened to, bring in a consultant to say the exact same thing you've been saying. But they'll think they're brilliant. But if it solves the problem, go for it. Right? Understand, like, hey, sometimes you just have to use that voice. I used to hate that, but it's useful from time to time.
Well, the other thing they bring in is a nice report that becomes discoverable.
Yeah. So they can say that these things are disposable too. They say something that executives don't want to hear, they can be dismissed and fired. Who cares? Not your problem. I'm a disposable asset. That's what my professors all the time. You need to say something that needs to be said, go for it.
There you go. All right, well, I want to drag us back to CCPA. We've kind of wandered away from it for a bit there. I noticed both of you are.
Oh, I'm saving mine for the final sip. The good news is I can drink water and it tastes almost the same. What is it?
Another Buena Vista.
You guys say you're picking beers.
All right, so thank you.
Let's get right up.
Single point of success. We've got to protect her.
So I want to go back to Article 9 of CCPA. And Rob, I know you spent a lot of time on ISO. And California seems to have dropped some pretty heavy shit on ISO. Right? Article 9 specifically calls out NIST CSF 2.0, which is a wild way of saying, yeah, let's go privacy well with NIST CSF. I'm not sure who made that call. I can think of a couple of people who that I might have to talk to them after this. But what does this mean looking at the global geopolitical space space here. Have companies that have invested heavily in ISO, are they going to face a new challenge of getting agreement that ISO cert has value moving forward, or are we going to all have to adopt US-centric frameworks in light of what's going on there in the larger world?
That's a great question. So what we advise customers is that if your primary vertical is the government, then you should have a NIST backbone. It makes sense because that is your core business. If you are mainly B2B and you're doing some government, ISO backbone makes a lot more sense because it maps to everything, right? It's an international standard. NIST does the courtesy of actually providing that mapping in their frameworks. So it's not hard to do that. The challenge of CSF is you have like basically let's say you have 100 people. I'm just using round numbers because I was Marine and math is hard. It weights each thing the same, right? As opposed to ISO, which says, hey, your risk program, your management system matters more than you being perfect, and you don't just get scored out of 100. Because a lot of times now, to be fair, if you are a pure risk guy and you run the RMF correctly and live and breathe by it, awesome. But 90% of you don't. So that's why, like, you want the ISO piece, I think, is like, if you use it right, you use ISO for what it's great at the management system. Take NIST CSF, put those controls in there, although, to be fair, there's not a lot of privacy structure there, so you're not going to get very far. But you're not going to meet the CCPA requirements by just training with the CSF.
Yeah, I think it's all very interesting. I think in the United States, a lot of people adopted this CSF, mainly because it seemed less scary.
CIS 20, but was it really 20?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You know, they did a quick research on how do I quickly, become secure or compliant in this CSF. It was at the top of the Google search. But if you're thoughtful and you're thinking more long term, you're probably going to find that ISO fits you better. And certainly in terms of mapping to other standards, it's a really strong program that, quite frankly, crosswalks really easy to a bunch of other programs. So yeah, it's scalable. It's good. So unless you're doing something crazy like going after FedRAMP, you're probably going to look at ISO and say this makes sense for my account control.
Yeah, fun fact about drafting compliance is Tom had hair before we started this.
It was really.
It's not called fun right
Yeah.
But I want to focus a little bit more, because if you read, and I'm thinking of some of our auditors in the room, I know Chase has, he knows out there somewhere. Yeah,
They know.
anybody. So the thing I'm thinking about is that if you go read CCPA, the audit standards say, cool, if it's equivalent, we will accept it and you don't have to do a separate cybersecurity audit. They specifically call out NIST CSF 2.0. They don't mention anything to do with ISO. So what's the guidance for a CISO who has built their entire program on ISO 27001, 27701? Chief counsel walks into their office and says, well, okay, so what do I do? What am I making this regulatory guidance that says we can't submit this evidence? We have to do a whole separate audit regime.
So what you do is you do this yourself, or you bring in a consultant, and then you build just like an ISO statement of applicability. Same thing. How am I meeting these controls today? Here we go. Boom, boom, boom. And this CSF is not overly prescriptive. It doesn't have any. It's not like NIST 853 where it's actual hard dates or hard numbers. So you just do that mapping, and then essentially you're still having one big upload rate. And you find an audit firm that does a NIST CSF assessment as well as your ISO cert, and you have a 2-for-1 deal. That's what I would do.
Yeah, similar. The whole NIST CSF direction under CCPA confuses me, to be quite honest. And I don't think it's a one-to-one applicability. So my advice, especially if you have ISO, is ignore the CSF and do a gap analysis against CCPA here. And solve for that gap analysis and chalk up the CSF mentions and other things the government mentions without real good reason.
So is that preferable though? Like if you you have an ISO 27001 program running right now, and you're happy with it, and you're an international, non-US based company, so you're an EU based company, right? And if you've got ISO 27001, 27701, maybe some of the other ones in there too, are we saying you should not bother looking at this CSF despite the easy audit, or are we saying we should do a gap assessment?
Here's what I'm saying, is if your end goal is CCPA, I would do my gap assessment from my ISO standard that's already deployed, and I wouldn't worry too much about CSF. That's what I would say. I don't necessarily look at the best practices in control language as non-US or US. I think of, I've been trained to think of controls centrally and work from controls to a framework. And that's why in HyperConnect, your controls are applicable to multiple frameworks. That's the way you should think about it. And you should understand that if you have a strong baseline of controls already in place, whether it's ISO or something else, everything else is a delta to that. That's how you should think about it in terms of your controls. And you're going to find out a bunch of the controls that you've already deployed are going to be applicable already to a bunch of other programs, including CCPA. So that's how I would approach it. I'm really happy anytime I can ignore something the government says. So,
and Tom, I'm with you. Like, so when you said non-international, I'm like, you can be U.S. based all the way. ISO still is like, what happens if your customer loves COVID? Or like SOC 2 is like, it's very squishy and nebulous, and sometimes it's not what the paper it's printed on, right? So, like, that's what's nice about ISO is like, it'll map to what you need to. So like, I don't think you need to be an international, non-US company to adopt something that actually makes sense. And once you scale, and lets it be okay when you have operational changes and you have to slow roll something changes. You're under a lawsuit and you decide you're not going to deploy a web proxy because you don't want to collect any more data than you need to. Like, okay, right? But being okay with not being perfect, I think is super important. I think that's what I don't like about SOC 2 is that it's like, from its okay practice, but God forbid we change it. That's why the security profession has a bad name, right? It's like, oh, we can't change this. It's no, we're in our monitoring period. Like, so.
But I want to go back to what Tom said before we go to talk about these peers. This is getting off the board.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing though is you're saying that if a company had HyperConnect and they had an ISO program, your guidance to them would be fire up a jumpstart, right? Jumpstart against the CCPA and use the control percentage overlap to do a delta to assess. I'm not trying to use your lunch with consulting. You could actually do that in the product and make that assessment of here's where our delta is at. Is that fair, Tom?
100%. That's how I would do it. I don't see the benefit of bringing the third program into the discussion. That's my opinion.
Not unless you're selling in Texas or something where you need CSF or something.
Sure.
Some government. You're absolutely right. CSF's not.
Can you put that in writing? I'm just curious.
I'm with you. 100%.
This is where we remind everyone this is not legal advice.
But I have watched 3 seasons of Law and Order, so.
I watched Ace Attorney. There you go. You got it. Yeah, exactly. Cool, let's move on to beer reviews. So Rob, I think you've seen the show before. We typically rate beers on a scale of 1 to 5. It's 1 to 5, right? Or is it 1 to 10? It's 1 to 10, actually. I've never rated it above a 5, so I'd be very scared.
It is on the bottom.
Is that true?
It's just so fancy.
Yeah, so on a scale of 1 to 10, who wants to go first?
Well,
Rob.
I think Rob should go first.
No, you're saying, well, he's actually
So,
first.
yeah.
We can find out how he feels about his first beer.
So if a 10 is a Dunkel in Munich, a 9 is Schreinerbach, this is an 8.
Wow.
Because it doesn't sound, it doesn't come with a MacBook.
I disagree.
Oh, okay. Oh, wait, that's right. That's all 4 beers.
Not sure.
Must be 2 for that.
Yeah, that's one. Switch this beer.
I was about to say, I saw someone in the audience.
So I'll go. So this beer reminds me of a canoe. Kayne. You're supposed to say, why does it remind me of a canoe?
No, I'm too close to Canada for this
Because
joke.
it's really close to water. It doesn't have, it just doesn't have a lot there for, the beer professional.
The beer professional, that's your job.
Honestly, when I drink it, I don't come away thinking about much other than man, that didn't taste like anything. So it's very reminiscent of a Coors Light or a Busch Light. Even in this variety, I've had Cerveza Loco is served in my area, much better in terms of both the Mexican lager and the lime hint. So
Could you drink it all day fishing?
sure. I don't go fishing all day ever, so I'm going to commit to that. The next time I go fishing,
You guys fish all day and drink this.
yeah, so it doesn't excite me, it doesn't bring me back for another sip. I'm going to give it like a 3.
Wow, you and I are actually getting pretty close on this one. So, those of you at home who haven't watched the beer, the episode where I was never allowed to order beer again, the one with the cinnamon sticky bun ale where Tom and I were sick after.
That was literally awful, and I don't say that on any
That was my first one on the show, and I picked the beer because it was in a Kauai hurricane. So this, I really will say, I like the art on the can. That part's fun. So on graphic design, I'm giving them a higher scale, which is why they're up at a 2 now. I am giving them points for the graphics. I will say that if you leave this out, I cannot imagine drinking this in a boat and fishing all day, because like what this tastes after half an hour of just sitting on stage. The lime is very pervasive and it's pretty pungent. And it tastes kind of like bread that's gone off. So yeah, I'm giving this a 2. Tom's giving it a 3. I think we'll have in the show notes a full like what that averages out to. But Rob, I'm glad you like.
Yeah, it tastes like beer.
Man, simple taste. All right, well with that, that's all for today. If you've got a question, or if you think you know a beer that I like, or if you've got a program question, please do drop in the question in the comments below. We'll take those. And remember to like our LinkedIn and YouTube pages to subscribe for more information, security, interviews with professionals like Rob.
That's good beer.
Yeah, it's good beer.